I also really love the beach, and there's something about the ocean that's just really calming for me. And I'm a huge sucker for sunsets, and I'm really lucky because where my school is, we get sunsets like this at least twice or thrice a week. As Chloe mentioned, I am currently in the US pursuing a major in environmental studies. I'm also considering a minor or a double major in government, which is the equivalent of political science here, but haven't really decided. And so in June 2018, I started this campaign called Bring Your Own Bottle Singapore. And the idea behind it is really simple, is to get people to use their own water bottles or tumblers to buy drinks instead of using the usual plastic cup. So we worked with businesses like Sing Fu Tang to try and implement discounts for customers who bring their own bottle. And I also co-founded this organization called Re-Earth Initiative, which is an international NGO. And our aim is to try and make the climate movement more accessible to everyone. So what this means is that even if you're not from, let's say, the US or from Europe, and protesting is banned in your country, like it basically is in Singapore, we want to let people know that there are still many ways you can join the climate movement. So we organize capacity building sessions for youth who want to strengthen their activism. And in Earth Day 2020, we organized a campaign asking people to post climate pledges online. And we had an outreach of over 300,000 people across the globe. So that's just a brief introduction of some of the stuff I've been working on over the past few years. And a lot of people get into sustainability because maybe they grew up surrounded by nature or they've always cared about trees and animals since they were young. Well, I wasn't like that. To be very honest, I didn't care about the environment at all up till 2018. So 2018 was the year that I became interested in sustainability because, first of all, the zero waste movement was kind of just gaining momentum in Singapore. And secondly, because I was studying geography in JC, H2 geography, as if some of you have studied that back in EJ, you would know it's very content heavy, but I had really great teachers who really sparked my passion for this subject. And I guess it just stuck with me ever since. So at first, I started trying to make individual changes in my own lifestyle. So I bought a metal straw, started bringing my own lunchbox and utensils around, but it still wasn't enough because all around me, I would be holding my reusable container and every single person would still be using plastic straws, cups, bottles, cutlery. And so I kind of reached a point after a few months where I told myself, I don't want to just sit around and wait for change to happen on its own. And I wanted to try and drive change on a bigger scale. So sometimes starting my own campaign can sound like a pretty great achievement. But if you ask me, I honestly had no clue what I was doing at the start. So how the campaign started was I designed stickers like these, and I started emailing all the F&B businesses in Singapore that I knew, asking, would you allow me to paste my sticker at your store? And I contacted hundreds of establishments, out of which I only received a total of 6 replies. And of these 6, 3 were actually rejections. So it was definitely a very discouraging start. And I thought, okay, you know what? Why not I try something else? And so I turned to social media. And I started posting infographics about plastic, about my campaign. And that was kind of a turning point for me because after a while, the account started gaining traction and people actually began posting Instagram stories of themselves, bringing their own bottles to buy drinks. So I think this was the first point where I realized that even with such a small platform, because at that time I had only a few hundred followers on Instagram, but even with those few hundred, I could actually make a difference no matter how small. And so since then, I would say Bring Your Own Bottle has really kind of grown. In 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I decided to take the campaign one step further and we started conducting outreach in hawker centers and coffee shops. So I put out an open call for volunteers on Instagram, and overnight, Bring Your Own Bottle went from 1 person to 30 people. We started going to hawker centers on a weekly basis, and we would approach the drink stall owners, explain the concept of BYO to them, and then ask if we could paste our stickers at their stall. So this is just like a quick map of all the different stalls that we reached out to. And now we have about 230 campaign partners across Singapore. Obviously, it didn't come without its struggles. I started this campaign back in JC, and so I really had a hard time managing my schoolwork and running the campaign. A lot of people kind of like ask me, how did you manage to balance all that? And my honest answer is that I didn't. My grades fell really drastically, and a lot of people were trying to tell me to get my priorities right, especially during A levels. So this is a photo of my chem. I think it was block test 2, which was the last block test before A levels. And as you can tell, I wasn't doing well at all. Even now in college, I haven't been able to do as much as I want to in terms of advocacy. When it's midterms or final season, I definitely just put my advocacy aside and try and focus on my studies. That being said, I do feel like there's a difference in my mindset. Back in JC, it would be like I would just get so burnt out and lose my motivation and tell myself, you know what, I think the earth is going to die anyway, and I should just give up. Now, though, in college, I feel like I've just learned so much about trying to be gentle with myself. And as an environmental advocate, or even just as a student or as a working adult, I think there are bound to be times when you feel burnt out. And I think it's completely okay to take a break for a while. I always like to say sustainable fight for a sustainable planet, meaning it's better to disconnect in the short term rather than to be overwhelmed and then disengage forever. Something else is that I am a huge introvert, which you probably may not be able to tell right now. But if any of you have ever taken the 16 personalities test, I actually rank as a 98% introvert on that scale. Since starting my campaigns, though, I've had to learn to work with businesses, to learn to network and collaborate, or even speak on sharings like this. And I think my biggest takeaway is that sometimes you really just have to grit your teeth and make the most of opportunities as they come by, even if it scares you. And I know stepping out of your comfort zone sounds like such a cliche, but it really is true because I started out as just a random student who created an Instagram page, and I never expected to get this far. But somehow things started falling into place once I started letting go of my fears and really just letting my voice be heard. So I think I'll stop here for now and pass the time back to the EJ Alumni team.
Okay, thank you, Kate, for your insightful sharing on your on your own insights on your movement. So before we move on, if you have any questions for Kate, remember to submit it at Slido using the code 7637307 767307 so that it can be raised during the panel discussion later on. So next up, we have our second speaker, Adrian. Adrian is the founding director of Futures Office of the President, National University of Singapore. He has worked both in the private and public sectors and is very experienced in the fields of futures and complexity thinking. He'll be sharing more about what he does and the disruptive scenarios that he and his team developed to stimulate alternative thinking on the roles universities will play in today's world. So without further ado, I'll hand the time over to Adrian.
Great. Good morning, everyone, or hello to wherever you are in the world. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me to speak on this whole broad topic of adulting. And I find it very amusing and flattering because I don't think I do adulting particularly well, but nevertheless, I'm here. So I will inflict on you my thoughts on adulting for the next 10-15 minutes. The other thing is that I think, Kate, thanks very much for your presentation. Fascinating to hear of your journey in this space of sustainability. I'm going to talk about sustainability, but obliquely. What I'll do is I will frame it in the broader context of my work. As Chong Yu mentioned, I work at NUS. I run a little department called the Futures Office, which really is a small team of mavericks and rascals. And our job is to piss the hell out of our bosses and ask all kinds of inconvenient questions of the balding greybeards, and they tend to be all greybeards, strangely enough. So what I like to do is talk about the future of the university and how, strangely enough, sustainability and climate and environmental questions are starting to shape how education is evolving. I'm sure many of you would have seen some surveys done last year, conducted by IPS, the Institute of Policy Studies, and some other government agencies. A lot of young people were polled, and a remarkable result came out. One of the questions asked was, to what extent would climate or environmental issues impact your life decisions? Right? We're not talking about everyday choices, where to eat, what to buy, what to forego. We're talking about existential important questions. Where to work? Do you want to get married? If you get married, do you want to have children? And when you unpack the survey, what's remarkable is a set of responses that go along the lines of, why would I want to bring new life into a world that's failing? Why would I want to work in this company, which in the previous generation would have been deemed extremely glamorous and attractive, but in today's context, deemed to be unethical, morally dubious, and so forth. So we start to see how normative issues and values and ethics are starting to shape the thinking and the choices of today's generation, and not just in small ways, right, in consumption, but in the big things. Do I want to get married? Where do I want to work? In working in this kind of organization or in this kind of industry, am I inadvertently reproducing the ills that I am taking great offense in? So that's basically what I'm talking about today. So a little bit about me. That's my little bio here. Slight confession, I have a son in EJC, and I've been associated with EJC since your days in Mount Sinai, which was my old stomping ground. Just for context, I used to study in Lousy School. So I've got 3 sons, one in JC, one in secondary, and one in primary. So I have the full experience of the education system. And while the bio sounds great, what I normally say is that I have the kind of CV that makes the typical Asian parent throw up their hands in despair, right? I've been all over the place. I've zigzagged, I've failed. I joined public service twice and left twice. I have been an academic twice, left twice. I've been retrenched twice, started my own business, crashed and burned. And now I find myself in university administration, trying to figure out the future of higher education and university. And I thought that this might resonate with all of you, because I think before the session, I was talking to the alumni team. I think the oldest of the EJ alumni are probably just in year 3 of education. I don't think anyone's working just yet. So perhaps some of these issues that I want to talk about today would resonate with you. So what comes to mind when you think of the university? And I suppose many of you are in one right now, right? Do you imagine something like this? Sprawling ground, buildings either in modern style or something more traditional. And of course, NUS, where I work, is not a very old university, or at least modern NUS isn't very old. Or do you envision something grander, right? Harvard, Oxford, right? The bigs, right? Steeped in tradition, where some of the founding dates of the Oxford College are really 3 digits, right? 899 or something like that. Right? We're talking something grand and something old. And so when something is old, it gives you the sense that perhaps it will always be like that. It's eternal, right? Unchanging. And actually, if you know university history, some of you might even imagine something older, right? The medieval university of Europe, or Nalanda University, a little bit closer to home. And what about the people in the university, the people you meet? Kate, I'm sure you have thoughts on this. You're in Dartmouth. Some of you are in other universities. When you think of people in university, do you imagine a certain type of people, right? A certain quant of people, right? And when you look at any university brochure, this is typically what you see, right? Young, energetic, strangely enough, all look very happy. Can't imagine why. And for some brochures, all incredibly white with the token, right, diversity element. But what if the university of the future looks nothing like that, right? And just because something has existed a particular way for a very, very long time doesn't mean that it will persist. What might change look like? And perhaps I might pose to all of you, what if you are the agents of change? How else might the university look like? And these are the kinds of questions that I grapple with daily in my line of work. So, it's typical to try to imagine the university in terms of technology and jobs, right? If you look at newspaper reports, articles, not just in Singapore, but globally, in industry publications, industry will say, oh, universities need to produce more coders, more IT engineers, more software folks, more of this and more of that. So sometimes we imagine the university in very functional and instrumental ways. What do universities need to produce more of, right? What's the flavor of the day? What's fashionable? What's hot right now, right? For a number of years, biotech is hot, and suddenly it's not. Perhaps now AI and IT is hot. Who knows what's next? And it's almost futile to try to predict what's going to be hot because, frankly, we have sucked at it historically, and I suspect we'll continue to suck at trying to forecast the next big thing. They tend to always keep us by surprise. So what I'd like to share with you is a framework to reimagine how the university might look like, not in typical categories, but perhaps in categories suggested to us by Thanos. And I'm sure all of you remember the Marvel movies, Endgame and so forth. And the crux of the movie was about chasing after 6 stones that represent the 6 dimensions of the reality, the universe, the cosmos, whatever. So I thought, what if we could reimagine the university? And by extension, for all of you to reimagine what your life might look like in terms of the categories of space, time, what does power mean in your context, reality, and something that we tend to dismiss or push aside because we're very pragmatic people in Singapore, mind and soul. Perhaps we've neglected it for too long, and we do need to engage mind and soul. Space, right? The question of where is the university? In my first few slides, I showed you the university as a particular place, a building in a ground in the country, in a particular climate, somewhere, right? For me, it's this few square kilometers, this corner of Clementi, for Kate, somewhere in New England. For some of you, Land's End, somewhere in Tuas. We sometimes get the Johor phone signal. But, if you have grown up, and I think many of you started university the last 2 years, life on planet COVID, university is everywhere and at the same time nowhere. We were studying from home. We were working from home. For many of you, university was wherever you could get a Wi-Fi signal and you could watch a lecture or engage your classmates on a smartphone. So my question to you is that perhaps in this world where things become so fluid and your notions of fixity just erode, right? Things are not where they're meant to be. My office is now my living room. Or maybe I frame it the other way around. My living room is now my office. My son's classroom is his bedroom. Or maybe we flip it around. My son's bedroom is the classroom. So when you talk about where is the university, is it still somewhere fixed? Or are we looking at a generation of folks who are so fluid and so adaptable that you can't really pin them down? But if the university becomes a placeless space, right? If it's wherever you want it to be, then where is its role as a marker of life? And these markers of life matter, right? The university is the place where supposedly some of us go on to make friends for life. Some of us go on to meet our life partners. Some of us have our best days. And for some generations of people, I don't know whether you noticed, but when they take their marriage wedding shots, it's a little cliched and tacky. They go back to university in the wedding gown and tuxedo and we take pictures on university grounds. Why? It matters to them. It mattered to them. It's a marker of life, right? Just like for some people, the school canteen was one. The basketball court was another. The lab, whichever stairwell we hit into, maybe smoke an illegal cigarette. Those are the markers of life. And when the markers of life as a physical place vanish, how does it affect how we grow up? Similarly, for time, when is the university? Right? The university traditionally can be defined in terms of timetable, the semester timetable, the daily timetable. Again, life in the last 2 years, and perhaps going forward in the world of recurring pandemics and God knows what else might come our way. What if the university is always on? If the university is always on, then when are your university years? When do you do university? Right? What happens to the phrase "my college years" when anytime is your college years? Right? And moreover, today we talk about lifelong learning. So your university years aren't the 4 or 5 years in your early 20s. It could be 20 years of going back to university for upgrades, for new courses, for executive programs, for masters, and so forth. So basically, your universities could be your living years. But what happens when all these different times start to merge into one? What happens to identities that we hold, our memories, the rites of passage, right? We're accustomed to going through rites of passage. I have gone through this exam, I leave this part of the world, this time of my life for another time of my life. How will we rethink the temporal sequence of our lives? And we now live in the world, and we've always lived in a world where power matters, right? The haves and have-nots, those who can, those who can't, those with resources and those who don't have resources, those who get to set the rules and those who have to play by the rules. And again, in the university. And I think, Kate, probably you encountered this in environmental studies where we start to contest knowledge. What counts as science? What counts as knowledge? Why is it someone in a white lab coat gets to say, what I do is science, but a Native American shaman or wise woman or wise man, that is deemed indigenous wisdom or traditional wisdom or folklore, and that's never seen as knowledge? What kind of power play is going on here? And this is important in university. I assume all of us went through the Singapore education system, and like it or not, and this is never admitted in open forum, but we know that in the Singapore context, STEM ranks up here. Humanities is a distant second and so far away. There's a hierarchy of knowledge, right? The sciences are always seen in the better light than the arts and social science and humanities, but in this world where we're confronting all these grand challenges and frankly, they defy any one discipline, how can we rethink power so that we can accommodate a broader diversity of approaches, of knowledge, of disciplines, right? Why should the token social scientist on the project team be there just as, you're just there to make up the numbers, right? Sit down while the physicists and the engineers are talking. How do we really know who has the tools to help us solve problems? So perhaps we need to rethink, is it power to impose your view, or is it power with others? And reality, how many of you think that you're going to university and you're going to come out to change the world? And I think it's a great attitude to have, but forgive the cynicism a little bit, and I work in the university after all. It's not the case that the university actually is an instrument of the status quo. Isn't it the case that the university is actually an institution owned by the establishment? Why would the establishment want to produce people to wreck an existing order that benefits certain people who are deeply entrenched, right? So when you go to university and you think you're going to come out to change the world, I wonder if you're going to end up coming out into the world to inadvertently reproduce it in more or less the same form. So as you go through your courses, and very soon some of you will enter the working world, are you working to change the world, or are you working to buttress it and to recreate it in more or less the same way. And finally, the last two dimensions, mind and soul. We go to university and some of us will come up with a piece of paper, and on this paper there'll be either the word bachelor or master's. It could be of science or of arts, and there'll be a content area. Bachelor of Science or fill in blanks. Physics, mathematics, history, literature, Master of Arts in engineering or whatever. Instrumental, function. Part of university education is to turn you out as an agent, right? An economic agent. But what else does the university stand for? What else should it stand for? And as I engage people in your age group, questions of purpose, identity, fairness, sustainability are starting to come to the fore. And you are asking questions that most universities, at least certainly in Singapore, in my view, are ill-prepared to answer. Just on this note of sustainability, and I'll end my slide on that. Almost every year, the university will announce very proudly to its students, all 25,000 of them. In the past year, we've done really well on climate issues. We have planted a gazillion trees. We have optimized this building so that the refrigerator has 3 or 4 ticks or whatever ticks. The aircon system has now been upgraded. And then we say all this and we announce it proudly and we expect a round of applause. And the students look back at us and some of them yawn and say, yeah, but what about your stance on decarbonizing the economy? What about your stance on taking grants and funds and donations from companies that continue to extract from the earth? What about the fact that you do all these small things, but on the other hand, you are also adding fuel to the fire? And we don't get that. Our response is to say, yeah, but we planted a gazillion trees and see the refrigerator now is got 3, 4 ticks. Increasingly, there's a disconnect, right? There's a generation that's talking past each other. Technical solutions matter, right? If we can make buildings zero energy, that's great. If we can plant a ton of trees, that's great. But technical solutions aren't the be-all and end-all. How do we frame climate issues not as simply a technical engineering issue, but something that seeps into the consciousness of this upcoming generation and generations thereafter? Because clearly, many of the life choices that many of you are going to make, climate and sustainability are going to figure in your calculus, and we have no clue how to have that conversation. So when you talk about the normative dimensions of the university, I think we need to go beyond just jobs and skills and employment and employability, but what about the formation of the whole person, right? A person who is in the world, understands the world in all its complexity and diversity, and is not just focused on jobs and bread and butter issues, important though that is, but bigger existential questions that can no longer be neglected and ignored, but are very much a part of our reality. So I want to stop here, and thanks very much for listening to my prattling on. Over to you, Chong Yu.
Yes, thank you, Adrian, for that very insightful sharing. It was really deep, and I think that is something that even I myself have never thought of, that sustainability as a topic, as an issue, and the solutions that governments, universities are actually providing. There's another way to look at it, and I think that you have shown us today that we can definitely look at all kinds of situations and the futures with different possible scenarios. So now I think we can proceed on to the panel discussion. So maybe to kick things off, thank you to everyone who have submitted your questions on Slido. It was really encouraging to see so many questions. But let's start off with our pre-event survey questions. So I think that maybe we can start off with something more generic that wasn't directed at any of the speakers. One question was that what are some local factors that you think would necessitate sustainability movements or solutions in Singapore will look different from those elsewhere in the world? Let's say, for example, in the United States. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question again?
So sorry. Yeah, so what are some local factors in Singapore that would necessitate that sustainability movements and solutions to look different from those that are proposed or advocated elsewhere in the world?
Kate, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think for sure it's just the entire way our social and political systems are structured. There's just a lot less flexibility in terms of, let's say, activism. And that's something that personally I've struggled with a lot in terms of, for example, even if I'm just putting out a post on Instagram, I'm always very mindful about what I say, where the boundaries are. And it can be very scary to try and push those boundaries because we have seen what happened to some activists who maybe got into trouble for things they put online. And so I think that is definitely one of the biggest points. And another thing is definitely our natural constraints in terms of like solar. And I think this is something that the establishment or the government has mentioned many, many times. And it's very timely that this question is coming at a time where the parliament just finished discussing a motion on climate change as well, where they again emphasized on Singapore's constraints and like the limitations of what we can do. And so I feel like those are some of the biggest barriers, but I'm sure Adrian has more insights as well.
No, Kate, see the pitfall of going second is that the first person always says everything that you wanted to say. So now I'm scrambling to think of something smart to say, and now I'm coming up very short, except to echo what Kate said. And Chong Yu, your question really says it all. Local situation, local context, right? Locally, and we know Singapore very well, the Singapore story, the Singapore narrative, the system. I think it's changed. Is it changing fast enough? I'm not sure. Some say yes, some say no. But certainly since the 2011 general election, ground-up initiative, great. Co-create, great. Collaboration, great. Grassroots, awesome. Self-help, fantastic. We always want self-help. Advocacy, okay. Slight question mark. Depends. Politics, oh, hang on a second. Wait a minute. Right? So in the last few years, through Nature Society and some of our other friends and through Kate's work, we see advocacy. And some can and some cannot, and some ring alarm bells because they frame it in a very combative way and are deemed to have an agenda, and some do it in a more palatable way. And that's great. But it's only a hop, skip, and jump away from advocacy to a green politics. So in the next 10 years, might we see the emergence of green political parties like you see in Germany, in Western Europe, and where they may not take the reins of power, certainly they are the kingmakers. They tilt the balance. They are a part of a coalition headed by whoever happens to win the party. The other thing I would say is that, again, the narrative, right? I go straight to the Singapore mindset. And these two things are very hard to shift, right? Kate, you talk about constraint, and equally important as the constraint of size, of resources, and so forth, is the persistence of the economic imperative. The economy as an issue trumps everything else. Everything else is subservient to the economy, right? Whatever we want to do in terms of social policy, public housing, environmental issues, preserving green spaces, it's all subservient to the economy. So if you want to have a constructive conversation, you have to bear in mind where policymakers and those in power are coming from. Right? And those are issues that also cannot be dismissed. Because their rejoinder to you is that, yeah, you know what, you all, I'm paraphrasing, privileged people with time on their hands to ruminate about environmental issues Mr. So-and-so of three of the one-room rental flat got no time to think about environmental issues. He's worried about jobs, and we need to have jobs. And if I have to create jobs that have a big carbon footprint, that's just too freaking bad. So we have two sides that, unless you are able to come to an accommodation, are always going to be at loggerheads and combating each other, and both will feel that they have the moral high ground. So I think while it is right that we start to pay more attention to all these issues that Kate passionately advocates for, equally we need to acknowledge the fact that when we make certain transitions, right? Let's say we decarbonize and we deindustrialize, when we make certain transitions, maybe society on balance, on a net level benefits, but a ton of people will be displaced, will lose their jobs, and will suffer. And they will have no sympathy whatsoever for whatever cause you're advocating for. So I think we do need to approach this delicately, because no, it's not just a single issue. It is connected to many other issues.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kuah, Adrian, for that. I think to link it back to Kate, then you also mentioned about the parliamentary debate on climate change just at the start of this week. And I think that I did see a post about it and what you hope you will achieve. And I think that what was raised when I read about it was that MPs were actually supportive of raising carbon tax on businesses, but there, as you mentioned, there was also a lot of concerns raised based on the limitations that we have in the context of Singapore. And I think that various MPs have also called on the government to give businesses more time to adapt to the raise in carbon tax. And there was even a suggestion for the tax to kind of use like a formula so that it can evolve gradually over time to raise the carbon tax. So what are your views about what was proposed during the parliamentary debate itself as an advocate?
It's very interesting because I just spent my afternoon working on a post as a follow-up. So I sat through all the speeches and was kind of putting all the information together. I honestly feel like, so last year in Parliament, there was the first climate change motion, and this is the second one. If you ask me, I don't feel like there was a very big difference between the two. Because last year, the MPs already started mentioning, yeah, we need to raise the carbon tax. And the same things were being said this time round. But there wasn't really anyone who advocated for like a specific price. There wasn't any in-depth discussion about the intricacies of how the carbon tax should actually be implemented. And I think overall, the discussion felt very safe. It kept going back to economic imperatives, as Adrian mentioned, about prioritizing our economic competitiveness. So I think in that sense, there definitely, I mean, as an advocate, I definitely felt like it lacked ambition. That being said, a revised carbon tax is going to be announced during the budget next month. So I guess I'm looking forward to that and seeing how they plan to revise it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that actually there was a question from Slido, which is actually directed to Dr. Adrian. So I'll bring the attention back to to Adrian. It says that what role do you think that students like ourselves can actually play in shaping the function and structure of universities?
You know, if I try to be idealistic and try to channel some idealistic heroism, I would say that, you know, all of us have agency. All of us have a role to play in shaping the environment we're in. But no, realistically, there are many structures in place. There's a reason why the look and feel and form and the processes within the university persist and have stayed the same for hundreds and hundreds of years. They are very intractable. So you wonder that if you want to make an impact, do you want to go up against deeply held structures, or are there other spaces you can play in where there's more maneuver space? In the 1960s, during the period of decolonization, universities in the UK wanted to open up their spaces to folks from the colonies, right? The Caribbean, the West Indies, Asia, and so they wanted to incorporate more diversity. And the idealistic educators felt that by incorporating more diversity, the likes of Oxford and Cambridge would change. So imagine you're a young man or a young woman from Pakistan, or India, and you go to Oxford and Cambridge, and you're there because decision makers feel that, oh, by including you, the institution will change. The question is, did this young Indian man or young Indian woman change Oxford and Cambridge, or did Oxford and Cambridge change them? Right? Did they not come out whiter than white, more Oxbridge than Oxbridge? So yes, all of you, well, I think most of you certainly in this crowd are in university or going to enter university soon, and you're going to be confronted with all this very positive rah-rah rhetoric. Oh, you can change the world. Unfortunately, I would say that the world pushes back, right? You will change the world as much as the world changes you. And between the two of you, you produce a kind of a third culture, right? The question is, where else can you find power? Kate, you were talking about parliament, and we talk about politics, but often we talk about politics with a big P. What about politics with a small p? Politics away from formal processes and formal structures that are already dominated by incumbents and people who have fit that space and dominate the space. How else can you effect political, social, cultural change? Where can you be more impactful? That's an open question. I just want to remind you of what my friend, the poet Alvin Pang, is very fond of saying. The small picture is the big picture. The big picture is the small picture. If you can't change the world, can I change your world? Can I change every person's world, one world at a time? And so, Kate, I think you have been far too modest when you said that you were changing things on a personal basis, because you never know the ripple effects, right? The conversation that you had with someone might be shared with 5 others, and those 5 shared with 5 others, and it cascades. But to you, you always see it as that one conversation, but we never know how far these things will ripple.
Yeah, thank you very much for your response. And I think now I would just like to move on to the next question, which was directed at Kate. So why did you choose to study at Dartmouth? Because I think that it was a very interesting point that Adrian mentioned earlier on, which during his sharing and during his response to the previous question, that do you go into a university thinking that you hope to equip yourself with skills to come out and change the world? So I think that is one of the questions of that I would like to add on as well onto this question of why do you choose to study at Dartmouth? Yeah.
I feel like I've answered this question so many times in many interviews. I think on a very personal note, I felt like the Singapore education system, at least back in JC, was just very stifling for me. For example, when I was doing my advocacy, my teachers were literally telling me, why are you doing this now? Like, you have your A-levels coming up. And I just felt like my priorities were being influenced too much by the people around me. And so I felt like by going overseas, at least to the US, where it's a bit more liberal, I will get a chance to really explore what I want to study, which is definitely turning out to be the case here. And another thing that Adrian mentioned just now that really struck me was about how universities are an instrument of the status quo. That is definitely true in Singapore, but I guess not so much in the States. So for example, our school just committed to divesting from fossil fuels last year. And that was through years of activism and really like hard pushing the administration. But the thing is that we can do more visible forms of protest here that made that possible. And so I feel like just having those avenues has been very freeing for me. And I guess why Dartmouth specifically is because even though it's like a pretty well-known or prestigious school, it's very undergraduate focused. And so other schools have like their graduate schools and then people going to study to get their masters in law or business, whereas Dartmouth is very specifically focused on the undergrads. And so we have like class ratios of my class sizes are all like 10 to 15. You get very personal time with your professors. I've gone out for like brunch or dinner with my professor, and it's only been my first term here. So I feel like having those personal connections is very important for me because I really like getting to know people on like that kind of one-to-one basis. And yeah, the last thing is that I'm just surrounded by nature. We're basically in the middle of nowhere, and it's like literally a forest right next to my school. And so it's been very nice just getting in touch with nature again after growing up in Singapore. Yeah.
That's nice to hear. It's nice to hear. So I think that just now you mentioned about how the difference in the US and in Singapore is that in the US you can have more more formal protests to push for change in the university's management itself. And in Singapore, perhaps that is not very applicable. So I think that I would like to refer both speakers to the last question from our Slido, which I would say I'll direct it to the both of you on how do you think can students or youth, perhaps in universities, to make it more applicable to our crowd, contribute to policies or try to push for change in Singapore?
I am personally very interested to hear Adrian's take on this, but I'll just have a quick one, which is personally, I volunteer with a local political party, and so I can help to like write some of their parliamentary questions or their speeches. And so that's just how I've personally been contributing. But something I've noticed is that a lot of MPs actually pay attention to social media and the things you post or what you share with them. And I feel like that is one very easy way that youth can engage with their MPs and try and show the MPs like the areas that or the issues that they're interested in.
I completely agree with Kate. Contribute. There are big ways and small ways to contribute. Policies can be formal, right? The formal policy process. And there are informal policies that are associated with how a decision is taken. And this is where advocacy comes in, or some of the ground up grassroots initiatives. I think what Kate mentioned is earlier on is a real fear, right? The fear of transgressing boundaries or upsetting some people, and the reprisals, right? Fear, and if not the reprisals, the fear of reprisal. And sometimes actually reprisals are not forthcoming, but the fear of the reprisal is so paralyzing that it prevents you from acting in the first place. It paralyzes you, it hamstrings you. So I think for me, right, there are two levels you want to talk about contributing to policy. There are specific policies. Migrant worker causes to do with migrant workers, causes to do with preserving green spaces, causes to do with certain freedoms and other tangible issues. But I think what we do need is to fight against apathy, right? The worst thing to do is to say, it won't make a difference. What can little old me do? And if enough people say that, what we end up with is the tragedy of the commons, right? And that would be inadvertently playing into the hands of those who, for whom it suits their purposes that people are apathetic. So there are things that we can do specifically. And if you're passionate about certain causes, get up and do something about it. Write about it, blog about it, act on it. If you can't do it on a national level, do it neighborhood to neighborhood. If not neighborhood to neighborhood, then from cul-de-sac to cul-de-sac, block to block, something, anything. But more importantly is what not to do, which is don't give up. Don't throw in the towel and say, what's the use? Don't be apathetic. And that's tough because you look at the numbers and say, again, what can I do? I'm a drop in the ocean, but what is the ocean but the aggregation of many, many drops? And again, you never know where that little deed of yours, where those words of yours, how it echoes, right? How it snowballs and spirals and magnifies, gathers steam and momentum.
Thank you for that. I think that's a really important point now. especially in this day and age. And I think it kind of links back to one of the questions that was asked to Kate, and I think that you can perhaps share more about that. Dr. Adrian mentioned about not giving up. So you mentioned earlier on that there is many moments where you feel rejected, ignored. So how did you overcome, or how do you pick yourself back up and tell yourself, okay, let's continue this movement, let's continue to champion this cause at moments when you felt that perhaps there was the responses from society isn't as well as you hoped for it to be, and you just feel very not motivated, after facing various challenges?
I think for me, finding a community is very important. And I was very lucky because in my school, there was a pretty sizable number of students who cared about sustainability issues. And so I always had friends who were supportive. And even if like the companies were rejecting me, even in school, there were people who started bringing their own containers or cups. So that was definitely like very motivating to see. I think another thing was just, I'm just not someone who can like sit and watch all these things happening and not want to do something about it. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people experience. Like you see so many people using plastic, and you just feel like upset about it. But I think the difference is that a lot of people don't act on it. And whereas I decided to channel that frustration into maybe just something more productive. And that's definitely easier said than done. But it just, I don't really know how to explain, like, it was just some kind of fire in me that was like, I really want to see some kind of change. And this problem has been going on for far too long. And if I'm not going to do it, then who else will? So I feel like it was just because no one else was stepping up, and I felt like I had to, even though I may not have like wanted to, but it was like an imperative that I just needed to do something.
Thank you very much. I think that that's a really important point, that we should really be part of this cause because we are passionate about it. And I think that personally, when I participated in another discussion outside of this setting or this topic even, I asked the speaker, like, so what can we do to raise awareness for the cause that we were talking about? And he said, just read about it, just read about it, read a lot about it, write about it, talk about it, discuss with friends or advocates about it. And I think that that's how we can start. For those who are listening, maybe you are very passionate about this topic itself, or perhaps you're not passionate, you're just trying to sit in to find out more about this. I think that this is a really good starting point for all of us to just know more about this issue that we are facing, so that from there maybe something will spark your passion. And I think that it's really important for advocates to find what sparks that fire in you, and to just keep it burning through the community that you build up with. So if any of you are interested, you can also approach Kate after this, or you can just go to her Instagram account later on to talk more about it, or even just volunteer with her as well. So I think
I want to add on to something you said, and I couldn't agree more. Read, find out, learn about stuff, and don't just read things that you agree with. Don't read things that make you feel good. You're liberal, you watch CNBC, go watch Fox. Go watch something that pisses you off. Go read someone who makes you boiling, hopping mad, because then you get to ask yourself, once you get past your anger, why does it rub me the wrong way? What does it say about my own deeply held assumptions? Might someone out there be reading my stuff, getting outraged by what I say? Why is that so? I think while we are passionate about the causes that we have, take care that it does not tip over into hubris, right? And the self-centeredness. I think at all times, maintain humility. Yes, contestation becomes the real feature of this world, right? The climate deniers and the climate scientists, but both are equally at fault, because climate scientists start to, some of them at least, come charging in on the moral white horse of superiority. And that's not helpful either, right? So can we have a passion that burns, that does not destroy the other? Do we inadvertently other people, marginalize them, and vilify them even?
I just want to add on to that and say that a very helpful starting point could be your parents or your family, because I got to the stage in my life where I was like, yeah, let's tear down the system and like abolish billionaires and all that, because I just felt so strongly about it. And my especially my dad, he would talk to me and be like, what are you talking about? Like, how do you think we can achieve all that? And he would be very rational about it, which was very frustrating for me, but it was very important in keeping me in check and really forcing me to think about what I was saying. And with the generational gap, I saw the question about that as well. There are definitely very different mindsets and beliefs in each generation. And so sometimes talking to your parents can be a very helpful bridge in trying to formulate your own thoughts and also trying to like give them your point of view. Yeah.
In fact, Chong, if you don't mind, I'm very intrigued by the second question on this generation gap. We want debate, we want discussion, but through debates we hope to generate light. Unfortunately, far too often we generate heat and useless friction, and that's not helpful. You want the light. Often that's not coming. I think always there has been a gap between generations. Always. Growing with 50s, teenagers growing in the 50s will look at the parents and say, you don't get me and I don't get you and so forth. And on. A generation gap always persists. My sense is that the generation gap today is especially magnified because of the exposure that young people have, the access to information, to perspectives, to points of view, and much of this is enabled by technology, and technology can bring people in, but at the same time can marginalize other people. My sons are on platforms that some of them I don't know how to navigate. And so you end up today in silos. So this generation gap that we're confronting today is not just a case of we don't use the same vocabulary. We are not driven by the same value system. It could literally be, I'm not where you're at. You're not where I'm at. We barely meet. We're siloed. So I think there's something that we do need to try to address. Because if I just surround people who say all the things I like to hear, then we get this echo chamber effect. And then every time I go into this echo chamber, I feel good about myself because I get validation. And part of validation comes from vilifying another group outside my echo chamber. So we do need to rethink this generation dynamic. How can we make it work for us? Over the last few years, again, it's been completely non-productive, right? One side calls the other, okay, sit down, boomer, and the other side looks at this side and says, sit down, snowflake, and we get nowhere, right? How can we, on both parts, humble ourselves and say, hey, I have experience in this world, I'm older than you, and some of it might be useful, and I acknowledge that some of it might be irrelevant because your world is different from mine, right? And another side could be saying, yeah, I know more than you ever could because I don't just have access to the physical library. I have all the world's information at my disposal and I know how to look for it and you don't. But there's some stuff that I cannot find out on this and I do need to talk and draw from you certain wisdoms such as it is. So can we have a more productive relationship rather than, okay, boomer, and sit down, snowflake? It's not working, right? It feels great, but the mutual contempt, it's not working because we're all in this ship and this ship is sinking fast. So we better figure a way to work together or else we're screwed.
Yeah, there's a quote that I really like. It's an indigenous saying, actually. Youth run the fastest, but the elders know the path. And I put this in the chat, but recently I've been reading Lee Kuan Yew's books, like Singapore Story, and there's one in particular, Hard Choose to keep Singapore going that I would really highly recommend, because I think there's just a lot of historical context that my generation just lacks, because we grew up in a Singapore that was already very well developed. And I think just going back to our historical roots and understanding really like all the challenges that it took to get us to this point is really critical.
Yeah. And just to add on, no, my entering this meeting, I think I have inadvertently raised the average age by 20 years, right? I'm an old guy. I got kids, so one of them is in EJC, is in year 2. But I would also say this, right? For my generation, our context is different. It's very typical of my generation to say to you folks, and forgive me, I paint with a very broad brush, to denigrate what you say as you and your first world problems. I think you've heard this before. But the reality is that you are living in the first world. And not your fault that the problems you confront are first world problems. Right? And it's, again, not helpful for me to always begin with grandfather's story by saying, I know back in my day, blah, blah, blah. But back in the day is back in the day. I too am living in this shared worldview. So again, I ask, how can we complement rather than mutually then accuse each other and to view each other with mutual contempt? So I just want to get it off my chest.
Yeah, thank you both of you for that. Wow, that conversation. It was really nice to see both different from different perspectives from different age groups as well. And I think that is something that youth today perhaps can really can really listen and understand from both perspectives as well. And I think perhaps as we are nearing the end of the whole panel discussion, perhaps we can talk more about the future. So there was one question directed to Kate about what are your plans after university with regards to climate activism? Yeah.
To be very honest, I have no clue. I mean, it's only my first year in uni, and I think I'm not in a rush to try and fix myself to a career path. In terms of activism itself, I would definitely say like it's not going to be a full-time thing. I don't even know if I'll continue like my Instagram, just because I feel like there are so many ways I can contribute to sustainability, and my career will probably be centered around that. And so it doesn't always have to be advocacy, you know, like you could be working in an MNC or a startup and still pushing for sustainability in those aspects. And then just to quickly address the second question, I am on scholarship, but it's private and it's thankfully bond-free, so I'm not bound to a particular career path. And so I'm really just taking my time to figure out what I feel will be best for me and most aligned with my interests and values.
Okay, that's nice to hear. And I think that to Adrian, so what are some of the rising sectors or industries that young adults like our alumni can actually look out for? Because I know that sustainability is kind of like the buzzword in many sectors and even in national policy recently on how we can better equip our citizens with skills to prepare them for the green economy. So what would you say about this?
So a couple of weeks ago, the government agency Skills Future Singapore, they produced a report where they marked out some of the emerging sectors and the kinds of skills that you need to attain in order to make the best use of those opportunities. And one of the sectors, of course, is the green sector or sustainability, or and there are many ways to define that sector. And I just want to point out that actually there are far more opportunities than that, depending on the lens you use. Because if you use a narrow lens, and again, if you use the lens of the technologist lens or the lens of the economic imperative, and those are powerful lenses. Certainly there are opportunities to do with food science, material science to render buildings more sustainable, and many fields in engineering are now addressing the challenges that come with this question of sustainability. Coastal defense, how do we mitigate rising floodwaters, recycling technologies, membrane technologies, and then a whole lot more besides. And there's so many opportunities, and that's still with using a very narrow lens. But if you use a broader lens and we look at green issues, sustainability issues through the lens of interdisciplinarity, right? And then you realize that the question of climate and planetary issues aren't just an engineering problem. How do we train leaders to lead organizations and communities in a world where climate issues aren't some remote issue, but really in your face, right? Do we actually teach leaders of organizations how to lead people in a world where the environment is starting to fail us, or it's a part of our decision-making calculus? What about some of the broader issues associated with climate? The British Psychological Association last year came up with a report that identified a set of anxieties experienced by young people, right? Climate anxiety, right? Yes, this is still disputed, it's contested. Is it really a thing? Is it not a thing? Is it just fashionable to create new categories? But the fact is, many people feel this deep-seated anxiety, and they attribute it to worries about rising temperatures, rising food prices, access to drinking water. Do we know how to counsel people who have to grow up faced with all these kinds of challenges? So in addition to the technical aspects of the climate challenge, and there are all these opportunities, right? Beyond this narrow lens of technical solutions and directly relevant or of direct relevance to the economy, if you take a broader lens, there are opportunities for us to address the psycho-social, cultural aspects of living in a world that seems to be breaking apart, right? And again, the green sector, issues to do with climate are not standalone. They have to do with inequality. They have to do with social justice. They have to do with a whole bunch of issues that if you use a broader lens, you start to connect dots. And that is where some of the opportunities are as well. Right, at some point, the climate question cannot be separated from the refugee problem. Are there opportunities in the humanitarian assistance space? Right, so I think we can afford to take a broader lens. With a narrow lens already, you can see so many opportunities. Although the irony is that all these opportunities arose because we wrecked the world, but I digress. If you take a broader lens, there are the humanistic aspects of dealing with the climate challenge. And I think we can look at that as well.
Okay, thank you to Adrian and Kate for that, the very engaging conversation for the past 40 minutes. So I think that with that, I will end off the panel discussion. Thank you to both speakers once again for your sharing earlier on, as well as for sharing your insights and for really bringing in very different perspectives from your own respective views and your work in your daily life into this conversation. And I hope that our alumni has also taken away various perspectives and insights. And I think that hopefully after this session, you also be more aware and more passionate about this issue itself, and it can force you to also rethink about not just your role as a university student or a to-be university student, but also your role as a global citizen, as a role of society, and how you can contribute to the environment around us in Singapore and as well as in the whole globe. So thank you all for coming. We actually have a short feedback survey that we would hope our participants can fill in. So if you can, you can scan the QR code to give us your feedback, or we'll also be sending this out via link later on, but preferably you can scan the QR code here. Yeah, and I think that personally, I took away a lot from this session as well, because for me, personally, I also didn't, prior to this session, I wouldn't say I'm a very active actively reading about this issue or the environment. But I think that from this session, it really made me rethink about my stance and rethink about this issue and the world that we live in. And I think that I'd just like to personally say thank you to the both of you as well for giving me so much insights and learning so much about this topic in this short 1.5 hour session. Yeah. So if any of the alumni has issues accessing the code, do let us know. You can drop us a text in the Zoom chat as well. The link will not require you to use your EJC account, so you can just access it using your whatever email accounts that you are signed up to. Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks very much for having me. Lovely to meet you all. I learned a lot as well. Thank you, Kate, Chong-Yu, and the alumni team.
Thank you very much. Yes. Here, just give our participants some time to fill in the form. And actually, our teacher in charge from the EJC Alumni is also has also just sent a message for to Adrian and Kate to show our appreciation for the sharing and the enlightening perspectives. Yeah. Anything to add?
Really to Adrian and Kate, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, especially for Kate. I know it's like what time is it now? 10 to 11. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday morning and really sharing valuable insights. I think these are really pointers that cannot be learned in the classroom, even in university. And these are really fresh perspectives that I think is very new to all of us. Yeah. So we have Rachel, Miss Rachel Teo, camera on. You want to say something?
No, just thought it was nice to finally show my rather disheveled face from handling the kids. But I've been listening so thank you very much for taking the weekend to come and speak to us. Yeah, it's a nice cozy group, and I think from the questions that have surfaced, I think you actually have a very engaged audience, although it's behind closed screens. Yeah, so thank you, really, from the bottom of our hearts.
Yes,
It was great fun. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, just wanted to add to the participants, if anyone still has questions, feel free to reach out. Like I said, I'm the same age as you guys, so don't see me as a professional or expert, because I'm also still trying to figure things out along the way. Yeah,
definitely. Miss Mark, you want to say something?
It's fine, but really appreciate you all spending such precious time with us. And I must say that you're really kept to the spirit of the adulting theme, right? Everything you've shared is really about what it means to be human, isn't it? About finding out about yourselves, finding out about perspectives, the world, the human condition, right? So really appreciate such insight. Thank you so much, and great job to the alumni. Really proud of you guys.
Well done. Here.
Workshop. So great work, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, this wouldn't have been possible without, the participants that actually joined us today, and really for posting such good questions to keep the conversation going. We really appreciate that. So yes, please give us your sincere feedback, and if you want to provide us with more details on how we can improve, just drop any of us a message on Telegram or even DM our Instagram account. Yeah, so I think that wraps up our first
session. And if anyone is in NUS, and if you happen to be near University Hall, come by, I'll buy you a coffee.
Definitely. We have quite a few NUS students in the call.
All right, that's great.
All right, so yes, we feel free to contact us or the speakers if you would like to find out more. And that concludes our soft launch, our first ever adulting session, adulting talk series. So thank you so much once again. Have a good afternoon. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Goodbye. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.